We've had 4 brilliant speakers, I think everybody would agree. We've heard some real-life stories coming out of Canada, and I keep going on. The reason we've brought in some Canadian speakers in the 2 events that we've held is because it's very real about what they have experienced there and what we potentially could be following in their footsteps. We've had from Carol a wonderful presentation explaining that actually by having to cram in even more into a student's learning, that they're taking away time spent on palliative care now to think about ways about assisted dying, which seems immoral and illogical. And then Rachel with some very specific cases relating to mental illness. So 4 very powerful presentations. And I'm hoping from the back, there is going to be a way that you're going to be able to submit questions which are magically going to appear to me. And then we're going to have, if we can have the speakers to come up on stage, and they will select who's going to answer it. Phil, have we got a link to where they can put it up? QR code. Use the QR code. Get your, if you get your smartphones out. Not everybody has a phone. I know that, don't worry. I can also see hands going up. There's a lady down here who's keen to answer one. But if some who do want to put it up, because they'll come through to me, so I'll then hopefully build up a bit of a bank of some questions here. But I will also take questions from the floor. So is everybody happy about the 2 ways to do it? And I'll look out through the lights. But, Madam, would you like to say something?
Yes, thank you. I've written the question down, actually. All right, so my son is a 52-year-old...
Hang on, Madam, just 1 second, because otherwise the people behind you weren't here.
Yes, oh, thank you. I have a son who's 52 years of age. However, his mental age ranges between 6 years and 13 years. He's been diagnosed obviously as a child as severe learning difficulties, ankylosing spondylitis, and Writer's syndrome. And in spite of all of the above, he's a real gentle, sweet soul. But he aims to please everybody, so he says yes to everything, unfortunately. Now, I'm coming now in my older years, and I am very concerned, very, very concerned, because although I've got power of attorney now, what will happen when I'm not here? I do have 2 other children who actually, one lives in France and the other is about to live in France. So, yes, I'm really, really concerned and been concerned for some time. If I may just briefly say, I was quite ill for some time, and he had to go into a care home, nursing home, for a while. And I'm so sorry, but the care was almost non-existent, really. It was awful, because they didn't cater for his needs. And yes, it took me a long time to get over that. So thank you.
So if this were in Canada, they couldn't approve assisted death for him at this point in time, because obviously speaking, he wouldn't be considered competent to make decisions like that. My advice to you is, I'm assuming you are seen as the power of attorney for care. You are seen as the person who has the right to make medical decisions for him. That's right. So I would make sure that you have someone who you truly trust, who truly shares your values, who can do that if you become incapable of doing that anymore. Because you want to make sure that the next person, if you can't do that, like something were to happen to you, you have to make sure that that ability to make decisions for your son is passed to somebody who you truly do trust, shares your values. Yeah. Yes, that's right. Yeah. At this moment, you have power of attorney, right? Right, but in the future, if something were to happen, I'm not saying something will, but if it were to happen.
Okay, but for instance, with my children not living on the island, would now be better perhaps having my pastor or somebody like that to...
well, I'm not going to suggest it. It's going to be someone who shares your values, who's willing to do it. Because obviously, if something were to happen to you, you would be concerned for your son. So therefore, you should make sure you've dealt with that ahead of time by appointing someone who would replace you if you can't do it.
I suppose what I would pick up on is your reflections on his time in the care facility, and just say, you know, in Jersey it would be great to see money going into enhancing our care facilities for all people who need to go into that level of care, really, wouldn't it? What a much better way to spend our money.
Right, I've got a question that's come through here. Is that how do you protect the rights, or how can you protect the rights of clinicians or carers who conscientiously object? Would somebody like to?
Well, what are they proposing in Jersey? Here's the problem. I'm in Ontario in Canada, and doctors are told they have to do what they call an effective referral. So doctors who are not, who do not believe in killing their patients, they don't have to do the act in any way, shape, or form, but they're told they must send their patient to somebody who will arrange to do the act. So right off the bat, that creates an immediate conscientious problem, because if you're not willing to kill somebody, you're not willing to send them to the killer either. So we've lost quite a few doctors in Ontario, and I could go on about stories about that. In British Columbia, this is the issue of palliative care, which is important. It's also Quebec now, but British Columbia is what she was referring to as the hospice that was taken by the government because they refused to do euthanasia. I'll just quickly tell you the story, because that's a conscientious objection story again. This hospice was right across the street from the local hospital. So somebody wanted MAiD, medical aid in dying, euthanasia. There was no problem bringing them across the street. There was no issue. They were not preventing someone who said they wanted to die that way from doing it. They just said, we will not participate in any way here. We will not be having that in our hospice. It will not happen. So the government defunded them, shut them down, and expropriated their building. They had a 10-bed hospice in Delta, and that was expropriated from them by the government. So obviously speaking, the workers there who were not willing to participate, you lose your building, you lose your hospice because you're not willing to kill. So how do you do it? I don't know, because that's all government policy now, isn't it? The regulatory for the doctor, the regulatory group for the doctors, are they going to defend you? I don't know. That's up to the Jersey doctors if that happens.
I've got another one here, which is coming back to you, Alex. But what is the mood change in Canada? How much is this spoken about amongst the general population? Because there's clearly been a meteoric rise in a very short period of time. But what's the general mood of the people?
First of all, Canadians were brainwashed by it, because we were constantly, there was an all-out campaign. So when I say it wasn't like there was 3 stories at a time, there was one story, and then the next story, and then the next story. That's exactly how we faced it in our media, which brainwashed people. They were afraid of dying a bad death. When you're hearing story after story after story, it convinces you that we're going to need euthanasia, and I'm afraid of having a bad death. And there was no other story but saying, oh, you can have excellent palliative care. That was not a story being seen in the media, no. So that's what the first thing happened. Secondly, things are now reversing, because there's been so many stories now in the media. So when the euthanasia lobby people come and say, oh, they're lying to you, it's not true. There's been, and I'm not just talking about, you know, conservative media, because that's not the case. We're talking about all the major media have been producing these stories of people who are poor, people with disabilities who can't get medical treatment. And it's starting to make people think, well, we've gone too far. Just before I came here, the Toronto Star, which is Canada's liberal newspaper, they're like the liberal newspaper, they have come out saying Canada's gone too far. So you're getting this backlash happening. The problem is obviously speaking, we need a government change in Canada.
Kevin, would you like to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. The only thing I'd add is that Canada is the best way of us arguing here against assisted suicide and any kind of legalization. So despite the fact that there are many, many depressing stories, I think there's also a great deal of hope that we can take away from looking at the terrible example of Canada. I think the key thing is that it's a small group of people who put this through, and they put it through a population that is barely aware of it. And when the more and more people become aware of this, the more people will resist it, because you can see the horror story of Canada. So I think I'm quite hopeful about these kind of situations.
So I'll tell you a very quick story. So last year we were debating the issue of euthanasia for mental illness because the government was there for backtracking. They had promised to bring in euthanasia for mental illness for March of 2023, and they were getting such a backlash. It was so heavy, they decided we're going to delay it till March of 2024. The reason, of course, was they were taking so much political heat on it, they decided they wanted to turn down the temperature. But at the same time, this young man in Orillia, Ontario, he said, there was an article in the local paper, he was trying to convince people that we should have euthanasia for mental illness, and there was articles about him. He had been homeless for 8 years. That's very sad, okay? And he was saying he has no hope. I have no hope. I've been homeless for 8 years. I have no hope. He wanted euthanasia. And obviously, by delaying it, that delayed his opportunity to die, right? I met with Tyler. So I had lunch with Tyler. And Tyler was quite belligerent and everything, but he was nice enough. But I asked him, Tyler, why do you want a doctor to kill you? And he says, honestly, I feel I have no hope. He's not talking about his pain and suffering. Obviously, he's gone through a lot of suffering. He's been homeless for 8 years. He's now changed his mind. He's writing a book. It's going to be coming out actually in the next couple of weeks. A bunch of us started helping him out. Someone gave him a place to live. He's going to go into rehab soon. He's had an alcohol problem for many, many years also, which addictions often lead to homelessness. Anyway, his life is turning around. But someone cared about him.
Yeah.
Someone cared about him. Then he had hope.
That's great. Question coming in here. Are there any stats or evidence regarding the impact upon the mental well-being, both short and long-term, for healthcare professionals who are involved in the act of MAiD?
Well, there actually is some information, but there isn't any recent information. There was a study done in Oregon a while back. There is a study out of Belgium, I believe. It wasn't, but there isn't a lot of stats on this. And there needs to be significant data on this because there is clear factual evidence about people who are involved with euthanasia, who turn around, and it really affects them emotionally. So in Canada, there's been quite a few doctors who then agreed in the beginning to be part of this, and then who changed their mind and said no. So, and their reason is they felt really existentially affected by it. But nonetheless, it doesn't take a lot of doctors to say yes to get most of the deaths done. So if you look at the data in Canada, very few of the doctors do almost all of them, and then there's a few doctors who do some of them, okay? And so you can see the data, and you realize, and it shows you how many have done one or two, but how many have done a lot of them. I'll give you another fact about Canada. Every major hospital in Canada has what they call a MAiD team. So they've decided that because it's legal, you need to have access to it. So in order to create access, they created these teams in the hospital. They're the ones who do the act, right? They go from room to room, and if you have a very chronic condition or you have a terminal condition, they will ask you if you want MAiD, okay? And then they will be the ones providing it. So you have then restricted it down to a small group of people who are actually doing almost all of the deaths. And then there's, as I say, a very a significant number that are doing just one or two.
Okay.
William, can I come in?
Yep.
Yeah. I don't know of any hard data either, but I do know of a lot of stories. And I know of doctors, and it is primarily doctors so far around the world, who are involved in this, who describe not being able to sleep for days and days before either seeing somebody to discuss this or giving an injection or prescribing the drugs, but particularly giving the injection, because whatever you think about this, and if you prescribe somebody some drugs and they choose when to take it, at least they're choosing when to take the drugs. But if you're giving the injection, you're just doing it. You're just killing them. And they will die very quickly with an injection, much more quickly than they will with the oral drugs on average. But I also know of stories of, from Canada, surprise, surprise, of, and they're not stories, they're all over YouTube and places, go find them if you wish to, of people saying, well, the first 2 or 3 times I did this, it was a really big thing and I had to take a big deep breath, and then it just became what I do. It just became normal.
So we did have a story about Madeline Lee. She's a euthanasia, a doctor who's done quite a few euthanasia deaths in Toronto. And she's now saying, well, I realize I shouldn't have done that one and I shouldn't have done this one. That was probably a mistake. But, you know, it's funny to say that afterwards because now the person's dead. You know, I'm not saying that any of those deaths were any good. I'm just saying you start thinking, well, it's interesting now that you're reflecting on it. Yeah, that was probably not the right thing to do. But the other thing about it, there's quite a few doctors who are involved in it who actually seem to really enjoy it, meaning they seem to find great exhilaration by it. And that creates the other concern by me, which is the fact is there's always a group of humans who are somehow into killing. And if you give them a chance to do it, they'll do it. There is a large group of them, not too many actually, but there's a bunch of them. And a couple of them in particular have written books about it, their practice, and they seem to really acknowledge their exhilaration with it. So that concerns me also. That's not really human in my belief, but, you know, humans are funny.
Funny peculiar, not funny ha-ha.
Very funny peculiar, yeah. We've got a couple of factual things which have been asked here, and it's really about sort of a process to where the situation is, where we're up to with the situation in Jersey. So there's one which says, how far are we from the assisted dying law being passed or considered to be passed as law in Jersey? Well, I think I can answer part of that insofar as there was as I explained in the history as to where we got up to, there was they asked ethicists to get involved, and so the report of that is now out. There was going to be a debate happening in the States Chamber, and that was going to be taking place before the end of this year, then it was going to go back to February, and then that's been pushed back to later on in 2024. But there is still, I think, Rachel, if you can clarify on this, I think it's that if they're going to bring it in, they were hoping to be able to have the debate and bring it in by the end of 25, wasn't it?
That's the plan within Jersey, because it has been voted in principle. But if you read the thing, it's subject to a workable way of doing this and appropriate safeguards. And also, very importantly, within the law, they've said that they don't think this should come in until there is adequate palliative care in Jersey. So I think, you know, as a psychiatrist, I don't think there is adequate palliative care for end-of-life dementia at the moment. We don't have beds for that. And we don't have 24/7 on-demand palliative care. And there's a new palliative care and end-of-life strategy that's been published by the government, which they've now got to look at funding and bringing in the resources and the ability to achieve this. So I think one of our hopes with this type of evening where we can get people understanding a little bit more about it is that, you know, we can delay this, and we can delay it for really good reasons, and that's what we really need to be pushing for, I think, in Jersey, to say we want better palliative care. We want these things to be looked at much more than we want the assisted dying legislation to come through.
Could I just say something here as well? That we have a couple of states members here I recognise this evening. Thank you for coming and listening. The invite went out to all states members, may I say. You can make a difference by talking to your states members about this issue. You can make appointments. There are so-called surgeries now, I think, is it, where you can go along. And that's what we'd ask you to do, and share your concerns. Please, people wrote in, and Rachel had shared this last week, with the freedom of information in the public consultation report. There was a factor of 5 to 1 against the introduction of assisted dying in Jersey, in that public consultation report. That was not publicised, but that is the reality. And that sent a message. It's not this 85% are for, 5 to 1 are against. Okay, so you can make a difference and send a message. Coming here tonight, you've made a difference. So coming to you.
I want to make one little comment about Canada, because some of you say, well, we're in Jersey, this isn't Canada, and that's a good comment. But you know, in Canada, in 2015, we were talking about what was going on in the Netherlands and Belgium, because there's a lot of stories of the Netherlands and Belgium about these deaths, people with autism, etc. Lots of stories that are quite chilling, what was happening in the Netherlands and Belgium. And we were told over and over again, but we're not the Netherlands or Belgium, we're Canada. This won't happen here. That was exactly what we were told over and over and over again. So I'm telling you, the argument that it's not going to happen in Jersey, or it's not going to happen in Scotland, or it's not going to happen in the UK because we're not Canada, guess what? I agree you're not Canada, but we were told the same thing. Once you legalize it, it's fair game to open it further. The other thing about it is you should be, you know, I'm not proud of my own country in any way because of what we're doing. I like our coffee, you know, I like our hockey, but I mean, I'm not proud of our country for what we're doing, but you should be getting these stories, and they do come out. You notice they're all in regular news stories, so it's not like Alex Schadenberg's writing some story and you say, oh, it's him again. No, it's not that at all. And most of the people writing these stories are actually not against assisted dying. They're just reporters writing a story that seems quite shocking, and we have to use them. Because the fact of it is it will happen here if you legalize. It may not happen tomorrow that way, or the next day, or maybe not in 5 years, but certainly soon down the line it will get there too, because it's inevitable once you legalize. As I say, really, there is only one line in the sand. You can't create new lines. It doesn't work that way, because everything else, every new line is based on a discriminatory point of view. We're not going to allow it for this person. We think we have a good reason, but once killing is okay, now your good reason is gone for saying no to expanding it.
Yeah. I have got another question here, which John, I don't know whether has got X-ray vision, but it came over that you've already answered part of it, because it was, are Alex and Kevin like to be speaking to politicians? Well, I can say again that they did meet with a couple earlier on today, and there are some in the audience, so that's a good thing. But I think the other point to add to it is that they were interviewed, so there is going to be footage, which again we will circulate in the same way that we did an interview with Leonie when she came across, and that was circulated and is out and about there. You can find it on YouTube. If you've got any questions about it, you can come back to any one of us, and we'll point you in the right direction if you want to see any of the recordings we've done. So there are powerful messages that go out there. And with regard to the state's members, we would encourage you, and I think John will absolutely support me on this, we'd encourage you to talk to your deputies, talk to your constables, and go and raise your concerns, air your concerns. And it's by talking about raising awareness, they're the people ultimately, when it comes down to taking the vote, they are the people who make the decision. It's not down to any of us in this room, it's down to the people, the sitting states members. So I think that's quite an important one. There's a gentleman down here who'd like to ask a question. If we could pass the microphone, please.
Yeah, thank you very much. I just want to go back to the end-of-life and palliative care strategy that's been produced by the government in partnership with the hospice. And just perhaps to get a comment from the panel, the strategy was very short on how this is going to be financed, and that was a red flag to me, really, because if it's going to be private sector funding, that's one thing. If you're going into partnership with government and palliative care and funding is going to be provided, I know they do some already, I'm just a little concerned about the leverage of that if a government is then going to be passing an assisted dying law. And I don't know whether the panel would just like to comment on the sort of ethics of that, really, or just how they think that might operate.
I think the whole sort of, I think euthanasia and assisted dying being within healthcare is just completely problematic, because we've heard really clearly from Carol about what's happening around the world, about how hospices are being asked to be part of this, and it so isn't healthcare. I really hope that our government here don't use that as leverage. And you're really right that there isn't funding attached, and bearing in mind that we're 26 million in debt in the health sector at the moment, and we're all being asked to try and save money right, left and centre. I don't know where the funding is going to come from for the palliative care strategy, but what we have to hang on to is that the law that has been proposed says that assisted dying must not come until the palliative care provision is better in Jersey, and that is a real leverage that we have there. And we need to be asking them to find the money, and I don't know what the plan is. We hope more detail will come out.
I'm not party to the detail, but I know there's a lot of discussion, as you would expect, about funding and expansion of service, which in effect would make palliative and end-of-life care available to anybody and everybody who might need or want it. So it's a complicated thing, and it's not for me to be talking about the details of it. But care costs money, and I absolutely believe put the care right, and then if you find an unmet need and you think there's a need for euthanasia and physician-assisted suicide, look at it again if you have to. But for goodness sake, please get the care right first. And it's not just palliative care. It's palliative care, it's mental health care, it's community care, it's social care. I could go on, but I'm sure you could work those gaps out too, because I don't live on Jersey. And there are gaps in Southampton too. I'm not picking on Jersey.
That's great. There's one here saying, we hear about in the press about Jersey's medical staff recruitment problem, and what do the panel think that the impact of MAiD or an equivalent, how would that affect the ability of Jersey to be able to attract and also to retain staff or medical professionals?
Just one observation. I was on the Isle of Man a couple of weeks ago, and a third of their medical staff are threatening to quit if assisted dying goes through there. So I suspect you'll have a very similar situation.
I think that's the answer.
So let me tell you from Canada, your problem is that palliative care is a prime example of what we're talking about. Providing proper end-of-life care requires a certain type of experience. Yes, you learn it, but there's also an experience nature to it. And in Canada, someone who I know quite well was a full-time palliative care doc in Mississauga, completely committed to it, well trained in it, lots of experience. And we legalized euthanasia, and he was told, you're going to have to do an effective referral. So he had, by the time he had 3 cases of requests that he refused to refer, of course, he wasn't going to refer somebody if he wasn't going to kill them himself, he wasn't going to refer them to a killer. He realized he was in a bad place for himself, so he left palliative care. Now he runs a pain clinic in Brampton. In November, I was at a Christmas party, and there was a local doctor who was a good friend of mine, and he was at the Christmas party, and he said, Alex, did you hear the news? And I said, no, what's the news? He says, oh, my medical license has now been approved in Ohio. He says, I'm not going to do euthanasia. I'm not going to refer for it. I was getting into a lot of pressure. Therefore, I've now been approved in Ohio. I'm leaving. He's now a physician in Ohio. So we lost him. So, this is a problem. It's a serious problem.
Somebody.
Yeah, okay, down in the front here.
Hi, I work in healthcare, and I just wanted to make an observation about, you talked about brainwashing earlier, and I know that we had 2 evenings where healthcare staff were to go along and kind of debate all of these issues, and I went to one of those evenings, and I think there was myself and one other person that was a clinician that was there. There were a couple of people who were relatives of someone. But they just, and I think the other night was pretty much the same. So there really wasn't an appetite for it that I could see within healthcare professionals. And following on from that, we received a questionnaire that we all were invited to, submit answers to. And the questions were really pure brainwashing, because it was, the questions were things like, This is the length of time that we think that, you know, people should be allowed to think about, you know, when they should die. What do you think? Should we extend it to this, this or this? But there was absolutely no options whatsoever for anyone to say, hang on, we don't agree with it. You know, I find that really concerning.
That's been the case in public consultation as well. The last public consultation was very much like that as well.
Yeah, yeah.
What I would say is the ethics review that's come out this week has said that one of the positive things within it is it has said that they would want to seek more views about what healthcare professionals think. And so I think there is a space for us to speak into that, and that's going to be really important.
I think one has to ask the question why that wasn't done in the first place. Having said that, in Canada, I think, is it still 2% of doctors
it's around, yeah.
actually engage in euthanasia and prescribing the drugs? Just going back to how you opened your point, I think all I can say is this is a very complex and emotive issue, and I think it's quite hard to raise your head above the parapet sometimes, especially possibly in a small community. That's my view. I haven't garnered that from anybody at the hospice or anywhere else, but it's what I've seen elsewhere, and I think that's a really real phenomenon.
That's great. There's one here which I know some of the answers to, but I think it's probably better that our panel answer it. It says, you spoke of drugs used to end a person's life. Is it a dose of morphine? The answer to that I know is no. How do they end life, and are there complications? So it was in one of the presentations about some of the drugs that are used, but I think maybe the point to pick out on this is about the complications. And who would like to pick up on that?
Yeah, the complication, and okay, so this depends what you're looking at. So if you're looking at physician-assisted suicide, the whole point is that people are empowered to take the drugs away and take them when they wish. And in Oregon, where there's the most experience in the world, that's done not necessarily with any healthcare professional or anybody there. So there's no data gathering. And in the Oregon data, they've had physician-assisted suicide for just about 25 years. And in their data sets, there's as much data missing about all sorts of things as there is data there. So there's not a lot of information, but what there is increasing evidence about how people die, and that the deaths are not necessarily fast, especially with the oral drugs, and not necessarily pain-free, and complication rates of at least 10% are being talked about. And one of the complications is that you might not die. You will die with euthanasia, because that includes paralyzing your diaphragm so you can't breathe. And that is how you die. So that is how you die of euthanasia. And the doses of the drugs are industrial. They're massive. I can't remember the exact numbers right now, and it probably doesn't matter this evening, but they are massive doses. So phenobarbital in ginormous doses, opioids, 5 grams of morphine. 5 grams of morphine? You know, we think someone's on quite a lot if they're on 50 or 100 milligrams twice a day, you know. Diazepam in massive doses, and this is a cocktail. It's not one drug. These are cocktails of 4 or 5 different drugs. Bizarrely, amitriptyline and other drugs that some of you may be aware of. So that they are, and there's no research. These are not researched formulae or cocktails. They are, the euthanasia kills by giving you a whacking dose so you can't breathe anymore, so you're going to die. And the oral drugs kill you by hitting all of your body massively, your heart, your brain, all sorts of things that keep you alive. It's not researched, and the only thing that drives, and in Oregon, there have been 4 changes of the oral regime over the last 7 years. The one thing that's driving that is that people don't die quickly enough.
And we had an awful, there was a shocking sort of statement, wasn't there? It was something that we were involved in earlier this week where we were told there was more research on thalidomide than there has been on these drugs being used for assisted dying.
Right, I'm going to take one more question for the floor. I have got some more questions down here, and apologies, I'm conscious of the fact that time's marching on. It's getting towards 9:45, and some people have started to leave. So I'm going to take one more question from the floor here. Then what I also, with the questions I've got, which come through on the deck, I will put these to the panel, and we'll get some answers out, and I will make sure they get published through onto the website, certainly of the Jersey Dying Well Group website. I will get these questions answered and put up to there.
So I have a few pamphlets there if anybody wants them.
There are pamphlets. So can we take one more question from the floor here, and then I'm going to just bring it to... Sorry? Okay. Okay, 1 second. I'll just hang on a second. I'm going to get a microphone because not everybody will be able to hear you.
Could I just clarify, when I said the 5 to 1, I should have said of written submissions.
Right.
Okay.
So we'll take one for the lady there, and then the one from the gentleman down here as well.
I'm a Jersey person. I left the island beginning of this year. I actually moved to the Isle of Man. So I know what's going on over there as well. I was a jury member. The paper came through my letterbox, and I was going through a very difficult time, family member dying. Anyway, to cut a long story short, on the 11th hour I applied and I was accepted. Within half an hour of the first meeting that we had, it was very clear to me that there was a majority who had come onto the jury with one intention, and that was to pass this law. So be under no illusion whatsoever. I used to do debates in the sixth form at school, and I'm absolutely shocked and appalled how it's roller coasted. The evidence was excellent on both sides, but it was overwhelming not to pass this law. But when you've made up your mind that you're going to do something, I think there's actually, scientific evidence that it's very difficult then to dissuade someone. I carry a heavy burden because I was distraught and shocked at, and I'm only talking about a small percentage, I can only describe it as coldness, really. They even wanted to include children. They even wanted to include children. Definitely depressed people. I think I completely lost it over the children part. And for that reason, they decided to withhold it. But they do want to push it further down the line, so don't be under any illusion. There's states members here. I'm very disappointed with you, not maybe you personally, whoever's here. I wrote a letter to every single states member after the jury. I didn't get a single reply. I didn't even get an acknowledgement. But my letter did go to Westminster. When I spoke to, all of this happened during COVID, so this was also made it very difficult. But when I was, anyone who thinks there's safeguarding measures over here, they're not. In my experience, they were zero. And my loved one is dead because of the Capacity 2018 law. So, and you want to bring in something like this. The naivety beggars belief. What I would say is, I spoke to the local politician and I said, you didn't even have the decency to acknowledge my letter. And this was a while later. And he said, well, how did you send it? And I said, I sent it. I phoned up the state's office and they told me the email to use and it would be sent to all of you. And he said, oh, you didn't use that. It doesn't work. and they want to pass a law deciding who lives and who dies.
Thank you.
What I would say to everyone, there are states members who are hell-bent on passing this law. There are a group of people who are hell-bent on passing this law. It is up to the individuals, the people who have a chance to change this. All the evidence is there. Do your research. We've had excellent talks this evening. Other things that are available to you. Do not pass this law, because there will be blood on whoever there will be. I'm sorry, I'm saying it as it is.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And just one final question from the gentleman here, please.
Thank you. It's not really a question, it's more of a point. Our daughter was born with a unique genetic condition, which meant that she was severely disabled. The doctors couldn't give us any prognosis or any life expectancy. We had 25 fabulous years with her. But every time she went into hospital, even though we said no to DNR, do not resuscitate, we were pressured every single time to put DNR onto her notes. My wife was woken up at 3 o'clock one morning because the doctor said, "Oh, you haven't got DNR on the notes, and I see your daughter's in a wheelchair. So she must be disabled, and she can't have quality of life." So my concern was always, if we put DNR on her notes, would her life have been ended? And what will happen in the future? We're saying people with only with capacity, but you're a 25-year-old in a wheelchair, cannot talk, cannot walk, cannot feed herself. Somebody will say, she's got no quality of life, without knowing her quality of life. And I know there's a lot of people in the room here who knew my daughter Rachel, and they would tell you she had a great quality of life.
Thank you.